History is so often remembered through this lens of massive battles, powerful leaders, and these huge dramatic moments that just seem, well, destined to happen. But when we look a little closer, we usually discover something totally remarkable. So let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to explore how, behind the sheer massive scale of World War II, history actually hinged on one quiet, immense choice.
It brings up a profound question, right? What actually changes the course of history? We so often think of these sweeping battlefield maneuvers or maybe the launch of devastating new weapons. But the most critical turning point of a war that completely reshaped our globe, it wasn't made on a chaotic battlefield. Actually, it was a single decision made inside a quiet, tense room on the late evening of June 4th, 1944.
Part 1. The weight of one choice and the 1944 need for liberation.
So by early 1944, this incredibly grim reality had set in across the globe. Even with Allied advances happening in Italy and the Soviets steadily pushing back German forces in the East, everyone understood one absolute, unavoidable truth. To truly win this war, to actually bring an end to all the devastation, Western Europe simply had to be liberated. There was no way around it. The Allied forces absolutely had to cross the English Channel and invade France. It was shaping up to be literally the most ambitious military operation ever attempted in human history. Now, to lead what was basically an impossible mission, they needed a very specific kind of leader. Enter General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, Eisenhower possessed a really unusual talent. Sure, he was a brilliant military strategist, no doubt about that. But his real superpower, that was his ability to unite people. I mean, think about it. Eisenhower had to manage American generals, British commanders, Canadian leaders, French resistance fighters, all alongside naval officers and Air Force commanders. They all had different priorities, completely different opinions, and wildly different personalities. Can you even imagine the egos in that room? But Eisenhower, he listened to them all, he built trust, he somehow managed to resolve these massive disagreements and kept everyone utterly focused on one single objective: victory. And honestly, that ability to manage people would prove just as absolutely crucial as any battlefield tactic. Section 2. Preparing the impossible mission and the sheer scale of Operation Overlord. Look, the planning alone for this took months. Every bridge, every single beach, every road, and every German bunker was obsessively studied. Literally, nothing could be left to chance. Why? Because the absolute slightest mistake meant years more of war and thousands of lost lives. 156,000. Let that sink in. That is the staggering number of soldiers tasked with landing on hostile beaches in a single day. If this invasion failed, Germany would gain this incredibly valuable time to strengthen its defenses, and all those men, they'd be lost. And the crazy thing is, they weren't going alone. This massive force was supported by an armada of over 5,000 ships crossing the channel. Add to that thousands of aircraft just completely filling the skies. They had to bring millions of tons of fuel, food, ammunition, and equipment. And the kicker? It all had to arrive exactly when it was needed. The level of logistical coordination here is almost beyond comprehension. It's like a giant, high-stakes puzzle where every piece has to fit perfectly. Which brings us to Section 3, the ticking clock and the weather crisis. So, as June approached and all these millions of moving parts actually seemed ready, nature decides to intervene. Powerful storms start sweeping right across the English Channel, and this perfectly illustrates the excruciating dilemma Eisenhower was facing. A lot of commanders recommended postponement, which, sounds perfectly reasonable, but consider the terrifying contrast here. Going meant high waves threatening the landing craft and heavy cloud cover completely crippling aircraft visibility. But waiting brought entirely new terrors. You've got hundreds of thousands of soldiers already stuck on these ships. Waiting seriously risked German intelligence discovering the whole invasion. Plus, a delay meant waiting weeks for the exact right tide and moon combination. Every single passing hour just increased the uncertainty. And that brings us directly to the longest night. Try to imagine the unbearable tension in that room on the late evening of June 4th. You've got Allied commanders gathered for one final meeting. Maps are covering the walls, weather reports are scattered all across the table. Every single person in that room understood the massive, historic consequences of what was about to happen. The meteorologist came in and predicted only a brief, really imperfect break in the weather beginning on June 6th. It definitely wasn't going to be perfect, but it might just be good enough.
History literally waited in silence as everyone in that room looked right toward Eisenhower. The decision belonged entirely to him. Finally, he spoke. And with just 4 quiet words, "Okay, let's go," the largest amphibious invasion in history was launched. Just like that, those 4 words changed everything.
Moving on to Section 4, Dawn at Normandy, Execution and Deception. Within hours of that one decision, one of the greatest military movements ever assembled sprang to life. Thousands of ships departed British ports. Below decks, you had soldiers writing their final letters home, completely aware they might not survive the next few hours. Before sunrise on June 6, airborne forces dropped right behind enemy lines. Then came the actual beach landings at 5 designated sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. Those beaches incredibly quickly became scenes of just unimaginable chaos, machine gunfire sweeping the shorelines. At Omaha Beach especially, the casualties were absolutely devastating, but immense individual courage began shifting the battle. You had small groups climbing cliffs, engineers frantically clearing obstacles, and steadily, relentlessly, Allied forces started to advance inland. But here's the thing, the success of D-Day depended on way more than just bravery on the beaches. It actually relied on one of history's greatest deceptions. See, for months, Allied intelligence ran this elaborate campaign using fake armies. We're talking inflatable tanks, dummy aircraft, totally false radio messages, all designed to convince Hitler the attack was coming at Pas-de-Calais. And it worked so perfectly that even as the real troops were landing in Normandy, Adolf Hitler believed it might just be a diversion. Because of this trick, he fatally delayed sending his key armored divisions. Those lost hours, they proved decisive. By the time the actual German reinforcements arrived, the Allies had already secured their beachheads. Talk about a real game changer. And once those beachheads were secured, the domino effect was unrelenting. By August 1944, Paris is celebrating freedom. Soon after that, Belgium and Luxembourg were liberated, followed gradually by the Netherlands. Until finally, by May 1945, Berlin fell and Germany surrendered. The momentum was just unstoppable. Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Lessons Beyond the War, Leadership and Courage. D-Day really stands apart, mostly because reopening Western Europe completely changed the entire political future of the continent. But looking beyond just the history, this monumental event leaves us with incredibly powerful, actionable takeaways for today. First up, preparation matters. A success of this massive magnitude only follows months of deep, dedicated cooperation and planning. Second, true leadership means actually accepting responsibility. Did you know that right before the invasion, Eisenhower actually wrote a private note accepting full, complete blame if the mission failed? Great leaders protect their teams, not their own reputations. Third, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Eisenhower knew failure could cost thousands of lives, but he had to act anyway. And finally, history often changes quietly. It's not always with a huge bang. Sometimes it happens around a small table with a single, quiet sentence. Look, World War II involved literally millions of heroes, from the soldiers and resistance fighters on the ground to the factory workers and nurses keeping everything running. But history reminds us that certain moments demand extraordinary leadership and a true willingness to choose action over delay. Because every great achievement begins with a choice. Sometimes that choice changes one life. Sometimes it changes a nation. And sometimes, a single decision changes everything. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I want to leave you with this to reflect on. From all the incredible history we've covered today, when your moment comes, what will be your single decision?